Okay, it says 9 o'clock on my screen. So I'm going to go ahead and begin. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar on managing grief. I'm Dr. Danielle Hattie De Silva, and I'm a full-time faculty member in the psychology department in Purdue Global's College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. I currently teach graduate level courses, but I also teach undergrad in general psychology and addictions. In addition, I have a special interest in family medical illness, and I'm trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction and hypnotherapy. I regularly lecture about mindfulness, stress management, self-care, loving kindness, and grief. Tonight, I will be sharing about the pain of loss and the process of grief, which is a very personal journey for each person walking this road. For those of you dealing right now with the loss of a loved one, please know that my heart goes out to you. I know firsthand that when you're grieving, words can seem empty. So it's possible that nothing I say to you tonight will make the pain you are feeling go away. Although I wish I had a magic wand to miraculously make that happen. But if you're here, I'm hoping it's because you are open to hearing something, anything that could potentially help you to cope a little bit better with your grief. What I also hope you will take away from what I share tonight is that you are not alone, because no one is excluded from experiencing grief. Loss is one of the most common human experiences, and so at some point, every person will lose someone they love and care about. All we can endeavor to do is feel what we are feeling, learn to understand it a bit better so that we can cope as best as we can when that time comes. These are the learning outcomes for this webinar presentation. We are going to be talking about grief in some different ways tonight. I'm going to start out by describing grief. Then I'm going to spend some time discussing the 5 stages of grief, as suggested by psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I'll describe some different types of grief and will provide information about how our brains and bodies are physically affected by it. Then I'm going to wrap up our time this evening by offering some suggestions for how to cope with grief. One thing I want to mention, though, is that although I am going to focus on grief as related to the loss of a loved one, I do want to acknowledge that grief is not limited to the loss of people or loved ones. People may grieve the loss of a beloved pet, a job, or other important role in their lives. The loss of one's home or other emotionally significant possessions can also trigger a deep sense of grief, as we saw with the fires that recently happened in California. And grief often occurs after divorce. Regardless of the cause of grief, it can be debilitating, intensely painful, and sometimes even leaves us unable to cope. Some people believe that grief is what it means to be human. It has been defined as the pain that accompanies loss. Others believe that grief is the price of love. I would like to share with you now this video from Sesame Street that features the actor Andrew Garfield talking with the character Elmo about the loss of his mother. And I'm hoping you can all hear this. Please let me know in the chat if you can. So I see you all saying that you cannot hear it. I'm hearing it on my end, so I'm not quite sure what is happening. I think what I will do instead is share the, did I share my audio? This is a good question, Emily. I guess I did not. But what I will do is share the link in the chat and give you an opportunity to listen to it and come on back. Mm. That's correct, Allison, a virtual field trip. I did. It should be in the chat. I will send it again. Let me know if you get it this time. That's okay, Carolyn. We're happy to have you join us. Okay, awesome. I see that a few of you have already finished watching the video. Awesome. Thank you for letting me know, folks. I actually find this video cute, yes, sweet, but also very moving and honest. Um, we give up a part of ourselves to love someone, and then when they're gone, it's not like that love goes away too, right? That love is still alive within us. This idea that grief is the price we pay for love really resonates with me because it almost suggests that there is purpose to grief, that the pain is worth it somehow, because it is a reflection of how much you love that person. Grief at the loss of a loved one also has to do with a loss of normalcy, a loss of connection, maybe even a loss of self, of who we are without this person in our lives. For those of you who have ever lost a loved one, you know that it can be both emotionally and physically painful, right? Your heart, your stomach, your head, your chest, your entire body can hurt. And nothing seems to make that pain go away. I recently heard David Kessler, who is one of the world's foremost experts on grief and loss, say the worst loss is always your loss. This really stopped me in my tracks because so many times we think about what we're going through and we compare it to what others are dealing with, and we think, oh no, I have so much I should be grateful for in comparison to this person. I shouldn't be feeling what I'm feeling. Unfortunately, there is so much shame and guilt and even judgment and secrecy tied into loss. Most of us don't know how to cope with the pain of losing someone we love. And many people worry about being judged by their family members, by friends, by members of their community or neighborhood for how they are grieving or for how their grief may look from the outside. For a long time, the subject of death was also somewhat taboo. So people often avoided talking about it, and society didn't know how to handle those who were grieving. As a result, people felt, and many still do feel, the need to hide their grief, to lock it away and keep it private and secret, which only serves to compound it and make it bigger, as we now have to work to cope not only with the loss of a loved one and the space left behind, but also on how to keep those terribly painful, distracting feelings secret. So, undoubtedly, Grief is complicated and messy and confusing and multifaceted, but I can tell you, um, we know more about it now than ever. And we owe a great deal of our understanding about death and dying to the work of psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Her book on death and dying, which was published in 1969, marked a major shift in the approach to conversations regarding death and dying. But what it also meant was that people were finally talking about it out loud and to each other. According to Kubler-Ross, there are 5 stages of death and dying, which also represent the 5 stages of grief. We have denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Because of the popularity of this work, many people, when talking about grief, expect to experience denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance in that order. The reality is, not everyone experiences these stages in an ordered way. And in fact, David Kessler, whom I mentioned before, worked with and wrote a book with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and he explained that she did not see these stages as linear. She did not believe that people and their death and dying experiences should be reduced to these 5 words. Grief is now understood to be highly individualized and unpredictable, which means that you can go back and forth and back again across all of these stages and emotions. Michelle, I see your question. You are going to receive the recording, I believe, but if you're interested in also receiving um, the PowerPoint, feel free to send me a message. I'll be happy to make sure it's shared with you. Okay, so these stages are now considered to be more of a framework for understanding one's experience of loss so that we can not only learn to live with it, but maybe also become better able to cope with our feelings. So let's talk about each of these, but I'm going to refer to them as phases, not stages, acknowledging that these are more of a framework for increasing our knowledge and understanding. And I see, Monica, you are also interested in receiving the PowerPoint. For those of you that are interested, at the end of the presentation, please feel free to type your name in the chat, and I will be happy to make sure that you get a copy of the PowerPoint. Okay? All right. So I'm going to talk about each of these phases a little bit so you get a deeper understanding of what they look like and feel like. The phase of denial is often characterized by a numb feeling, which some say is the state that the mind and body actually shift into in order to help us survive the loss. Some people may even act as if nothing is wrong or nothing has changed when in this phase, almost denying that something has happened. People on the outside might think that this is strange, might even tell you to snap out of it. And it's not that you think the person is still alive. It's more like waiting for a phone call from them that never comes, or picking up the phone to call them and then remembering that you can't. Although some people might think denial is maladaptive or an ineffective way of coping, it also might be nature's way of just getting us through the initial shock as we come to terms with what has happened. The phase of anger speaks for itself. Sometimes these losses can seem unfair and confusing. In addition to being angry about the situation, you may be angry at yourself, questioning or wishing that you had done something more to prevent the loss. Even more confusing is when you find yourself being angry at the person who has died or who isn't present. This stage can be very complicated, but what is at the root of the anger is usually tremendous pain, maybe feeling completely lost and overwhelmed. Again, although some people see anger as a negative emotion, Kubler-Ross described it as a way of staying connected to the person, of keeping them close. That anger, once again, is an expression of the intensity of our love for the person we have lost. So you could practice anger management techniques like counting to 10, walking away if need be, and deep breathing as practices that can help you cope with these intense feelings. But remember that this anger is a completely natural and understandable emotion, considering what you are going through and what you have lost. The next phase, bargaining, is something we do when the pain we are feeling is really intense because it's sometimes hard to accept that there's nothing we can do to change things. Bargaining is when we start to make deals with ourselves or perhaps with God if you're religious. We want to believe that if we act in particular ways or do certain things, we will feel better. This is also the time when you might find yourself asking those what if questions or making if only statements, going over and over things that happened in the past, wishing we could go back in time and change things in the hope that the outcome could have been different, even though we rationally know that can't happen. Then there's depression, this intense, overwhelming sadness, or worse, that abyss of emptiness is what we most often think of when we think about grief. This depression extends past the immediate loss of a loved one and can come in waves over months or years. Life can feel like it no longer holds any meaning, which can sometimes add an element of hopelessness into the mix. Someone who's experiencing this level of sadness and hopelessness could also be experiencing suicidal thinking or a feeling of wanting to die themselves. Someone in this situation needs to speak to a counseling professional and seek mental health services as soon as possible. It might be that if you're not sleeping or eating, if you've lost interest in life and living, then I encourage you to speak with a medical professional about the possibility of exploring medication as an option, just in the interim, which can help you deal with these depressed feelings while you learn to cope with your feelings, possibly through grief counseling or even personal therapy. Then there's acceptance, because this is listed as the last phase. There are some who think this means that they should finally feel okay, that they've somehow come to the end of their grieving process. Acceptance doesn't mean that you're suddenly okay with the loss of a loved one, but more so refers to that acknowledgement that the person is gone, that this is your new reality, and that even though we may never get over the loss, we must somehow find a way to keep on living. It's about slowly having more good days than bad days. And a big part of getting to this state of mind is learning how to simultaneously and in a psychologically healthy way maintain a connection with and to the person we have lost while somehow moving forward, which is why a sixth stage has been added. This new stage is called meaning. Acceptance is not enough for some people. It can feel hollow and does not take the pain away. The person is still gone. So where do you go from here? Finding meaning helps a little. It's been described as a cushion, something that lessens the hurt, maybe by giving you something apart from anger and pain to hold on to. The knowledge, the reminder that this person's life mattered, that they are no longer here also matters, and that our grief matters. Now, I want to be clear here in saying meaning is not about being okay with a person's death, especially if it was a horrible, painful, unexpected passing. It's not about finding meaning in that person's death. It's more about what we find afterwards, maybe how we grow afterwards. And that's not to say that your loss and grief are some kind of test or lesson. Absolutely not. But through the experience, we change and we learn more about ourselves. Maybe we also learn more about other people in our lives too. So, something else that is possible is that you develop other meaningful connections that happen in time. And we may not find that meaning right away. It takes time. No one expects you to immediately or suddenly find meaning. No one expects you to immediately or suddenly um, come to an acceptance of the person you love passing. You can grow around and with grief. And that's what this phase of meaning is all about. It starts with asking yourself if you're ready to start trying to live a little more by thinking about a way to honor what's happened in your life. It happens on your own timeline and in your own personal way. I'm going to circle back to meaning as it relates to finding purpose in just a bit. But I want to share first about the different types of grief. Although we talk about grief once a person has passed, anticipatory grief can start even before the actual loss of a person. For example, this is what sometimes happens when someone we love is given a terminal illness diagnosis. Some people immediately start to experience what it might feel like once that person has passed. Having the opportunity to process those feelings beforehand can help a person cope, but there is also the risk of getting lost in those feelings and of missing out on the time you have left with that person. Then there's abbreviated grief. which could be described as a short or shorter than expected grieving period. A shorter grieving period does not mean that you are not missing the person. Maybe you have been in a state of anticipatory grief for a while. Maybe you're a person of faith who believes that everything happens for a reason. For whatever reason, you may have shifted quickly into acceptance. That's okay. You honor wherever you're at. Delayed grief relates to when a person experiences grief maybe days, weeks, or even months after someone passes. It could be that you're very caught up in the practical matters that need to be attended to just after a person passes, or sometimes your mind and body just can't cope with the pain. And so you shut down until you know how and when you can start to actively feel what you are feeling. And your body and mind will know when it's time. Some folks experience something called cumulative grief because, as I mentioned before, when we lose someone, it can have a ripple effect as other things in our life subsequently change. So, for example, if you're grieving the loss of a child and your child was the thing holding you and your partner together, then maybe you and your partner separate. So you're left grieving both the loss of your child and your relationship. Or for those people who were the sole caretakers for their loved ones, once that person passes, what had become your sole purpose in life is now gone too. Or maybe you have to physically move after the death of a loved one, move to a new residence or neighborhood or even to a different state. These kinds of cumulative losses can make the grieving process even more complicated and might require more support, time, and even professional help. Then there's collective grief. This is grief that is felt by many people all at once, like what many of us felt after 9/11 or during the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result of these kinds of events and experiences, we were all suffering loss and feeling that pain to some degree. And we all struggled to cope with the changes that happened as a result. Some people think this collective experience of grief can be helpful, but for others, it can actually make things feel heavier and unbearable. Lastly, many people experience inhibited grief. They repress their emotions, maybe intentionally, maybe even unconsciously, not realizing that they are repressing what they are feeling because they just don't know how to cope or what to do. And so that delayed grief that I talked about before turns into something more insidious that affects their bodies and minds in a way that is undeniable and that finally requires action on some level. Because here's the thing, grief doesn't go away, but it has to go somewhere. And if you don't allow yourself to process it, it will manifest somewhere in your life or maybe even in your body. So maybe you notice that you're feeling constantly nauseous or unable to sleep, maybe a heightened sense of anxiety, or you begin experiencing panic attacks. These are all ways that grief makes itself known, even if we are inhibiting it. Regardless of which type of grief you might be experiencing, learning to live with that grief is really, really hard. We don't initially know what to do with it because what we really want to do instead is get rid of it. Not only because we do not readily have those coping mechanisms, but because of all the other things we are feeling, guilt, shame. We maybe feel disloyal. We may even feel the need to hide that grief and maybe even hide from it. But what you need to know is that our brains are actually wired to handle grief. We have learned from studies of the brain that grief is tied to many different brain and bodily functions. When we experience a significant loss, the brain experiences it as a threat to our survival, and it kicks into something like survival mode so that we can get through the experience. The brain employs mechanisms that increase blood pressure and heart rate. We also might experience changes in memory recall, sleep, heart function, and immune response. We could also experience a sense of brain fog so as to alter our sensations of pain and suffering. Through a process called neuroplasticity, neural pathways are altered as our brain creates connections between nerves, and it strengthens or weakens existing connections depending on the intensity of our emotional response. This is the brain's way of compensating for this life-altering experience so that we can adapt to our new situation or circumstance, like the loss of a loved one. So as I often tell my clients and my students, the body knows how to cope with grief because we are built to survive it. So let's talk about how we can learn to survive grief and learn to live with it, about how we can find meaning while carrying the memory of the person we have lost with us. Now, let me say for the record that learning how to survive through the grieving process does not make those painful, difficult feelings any easier. The only thing you can do is to own and acknowledge those feelings and try to cope with them in a constructive way. Because no matter how hard you try or how much you may want to, you cannot avoid or bypass grief. You just have to grieve in the present. Otherwise, that grief will become an echo in your life for your entire lifetime. So, with that in mind, let's start with something that seems basic, but which might in fact be very hard for some folks to do. I encourage you to keep talking about the person you have lost. Share your memories of them, tell stories about them, mention them in conversation if and whenever you want to. Say their name over and over into the universe. Find a way to commemorate them. I'm reminded here of the Mexican tradition of an ofrenda, and I'm a huge Disney fan, so if you ever saw the movie Coco, you might know what I'm talking about here. This is an altar of sorts, an area that's prepared for the Dia de los Muertos celebration to honor and remember loved ones who have passed on. You might consider creating your own area or ritual of remembrance. So maybe it's not an altar, but something that you do or keep near you as your forever reminder of your loved one. Maybe a stepping stone in your garden with the person's name, or a tree that is planted in their honor in your yard. Maybe you keep their favorite flowers in your home constantly, or wear something every day that reminds you of them, their jewelry, or their favorite accessories. That's how they live on. And this is one of the ways you can keep their spirit alive. Even if when you say their name, it is accompanied by tears and pain. Be prepared for that. Be present with that. Allow yourself to really feel those emotions and know that this reaction is part of the grieving process. Seeking support and talking to others can also be really helpful, but you have to do this with people you are comfortable with. Ask yourself, who are the people in your life who will listen to and comfort you without judgment, without rushing your process? These are the people you're not afraid to be your true messy self with. Someone who will patiently let you cry, bring you tissues, maybe wipe away your mascara. Hopefully, we each have someone like that in our lives. And you never know if your willingness to share about your loved one, to share your grief, allows others to unlock their own grief and to share about the people that they have lost. Talking about grief collectively, like you all are doing right now in the chat, helps us to remember that we are not alone. For me, a poignant example of this is Anderson Cooper's podcast on grief. He lost his father when he was very young, his brother when he was in his early 20s, and his mother died in 2019. He started a podcast on grief called All There Is. He acknowledged that he had never processed any of the losses he experienced in his life, and as a result, he did not feel joy. So he used this podcast as a way to share his own grieving journey and process his grief. One really interesting element of the podcast is that he provided a telephone number and invited people to call and share their stories. There were 1,000 calls and over 46 hours of voicemails. People's willingness to call and share their stories showed me just how much people need that safe space to talk about their grief. I also think that hearing people's grief stories can help you cope with your own. When you hear about someone else's grief journey, particularly if they're in a different phase than you, it can almost be like lighting a path. You learn new ways of coping, or you can show others a way to cope. And it can also show you how far you've come in your journey. As I mentioned before, a new phase of the grieving process is finding meaning, to somehow find purpose in the pain of losing someone you loved. I'm originally from Trinidad, as some of you may have realized, and I have a family member back in Trinidad who lost her husband to pancreatic cancer after a very long, very arduous battle with the disease. After a few years had passed, she decided to establish a foundation that raises awareness of pancreatic cancer in Trinidad. This foundation fundraises to find a cure for pancreatic cancer, and to provide resources and services to those who cannot afford them. My relative turned the pain of losing her beloved husband into her new purpose, and it has kept her going, provided her with an outlet and a whole new network of folks, both professionals and patients and families. Now, I'm not saying you need to go out and establish a foundation in your loved one's name, but you can find purpose beyond your loved one's passing in a way that honors and maintains their legacy. For example, did your loved one volunteer somewhere or do some sort of service or support a particular charity? You can continue doing that in their name. Or did they like a particular activity, hobby, or music? Maybe you can take that up. And in doing it, you stay connected to that person. And in addition to allowing you to continue to carry that person with you and carry on their legacy, these things also enrich your life. You also have to look around at the other things in your life that give you purpose, that are enriching, for which you can be grateful. Find purpose in those things and in those people. For example, do you have grandchildren maybe who you can um, use as your source of joy, maybe nieces or nephews who need your guiding presence in their lives? What can motivate you to get up every day that can give you that sense of purpose? Tap into those things and take action, because finding purpose and learning to live again can give you something to hold on to and to do beyond your grief and your grieving. Let's talk about some other more practical ways of coping with grief. Focusing on self-care is critical during this difficult time, because during this time, things like basic hygiene and grooming can fall by the wayside, particularly if you are experiencing depression. So I encourage you to do things to take care of your physical and emotional self that help you, that feed your soul, that give you an outlet, like spending time in nature or taking long showers or baths. Consider exercising, which will help you regulate your body and which releases endorphins to boost your mood. I'm not saying run a marathon, but maybe that's a goal that you set for yourself. And every day you take small steps towards achieving that goal. Watching your favorite TV shows or movies, listening to your favorite music, reading, or doing something creative like painting or even adult coloring. All of these activities can boost your mood, help to keep you calm, or distract you in a moment of grief. Many people also find solace and comfort through their religious practices and through prayer. So maybe plan with a friend or family member to attend service, or maybe schedule some time to talk with your religious leaders. I also want to recommend that you consider, and this is going to sound strange, but I want to encourage you to consider setting aside time every day to grieve. Because let's face it, grieving can be messy. Grief pops up and comes out at the most inopportune moments. If you put aside time every day to grieve, then you can almost hold it together when it tries to leak out at other parts of the day by telling yourself, I can hold on till 6 o'clock. I just got to get there. And that's not denying your grief, quite the opposite. That's creating a safe space and time to allow that grief to flow through you. You can put on a sad song and cry or journal about your feelings or just stare into space. You can use that time to grieve however you need to. I also want to suggest that you stick to a routine. Losing a loved one and grieving that loss can interrupt your sense of normalcy. Because let's be honest, grief can be very disruptive and unwanted. Establishing and sticking to a routine can help you regain that sense of normalcy and control. And as you do that tangibly in your life, you can also gain a sense of greater control over your emotions too. So try waking up and going to bed at the same time every day. Eat at regular times. Use a planner or scheduling app if that helps you know from 1 minute to the next what your day is going to look like so that you can focus on the next thing. And as you watch yourself get through each step of your day, maybe it will help you feel a sense of achievement, maybe a little stronger, maybe a little more capable of coping the next day and the next. The loss of a loved one, as I've said, can result in some pretty intense emotions. How can you cope in the moment with those feelings? I want to encourage you to cry if you need to, because crying is a way of letting those feelings out in a physical way. But here's an interesting tidbit. Grief tears are different. Regular tears contain stress hormones and other toxins, and crying can help let those out of the body. And what scientists have also found is that grief tears may be more sticky. These sticky tears can be a signal to others that we need support. So, crying is not only a release, but a way of gathering support when we need it most. I want to also suggest two other tangible, practical strategies for coping with intense feelings like anger and depression: journaling or writing about them, and deep breathing through them. Research suggests that journaling can help us accept rather than judge our mental experiences, resulting in fewer negative emotions in response to what we are feeling. Psychology Today has talked about the many benefits of journaling, and in particular, about how journaling can increase decision making capacity by providing the opportunity to process thoughts and feelings on paper, paving the way for exploring solutions. Maybe it has something to do with the symbolic act of getting your thoughts and feelings out of you, which allows a release of negativity and therefore minimizes negative reactions towards others, ourselves, and situations. Journaling can help you regulate your emotions, increase awareness, and reduce anxiety. People have shared about how journaling right before bed helps them to dump out onto paper all the thoughts swirling in their heads. So maybe consider spending some time writing in a journal or notebook about the things you are feeling, worrying over, or even better, that you're grateful for. I personally find the traditional paper pencil method of journaling to be very beneficial, but there are also apps to help you journal. I'm not necessarily suggesting here a dear diary kind of process. You could try a quick brain dump of your thoughts and feelings, which research shows can help you to process, refocus, and release negative thinking. Sometimes grief feels harder and more intense due to unresolved feelings or things left unsaid. Maybe you wanted to be there and couldn't when your loved one was leaving this earth. This is something I struggle with all the time because I was not able to be there when my grandmother passed away. And so I understand that this is the tough one. One of the things that I recommend to clients when they feel like there are things left unsaid or unresolved is that they write letters to their loved ones. Be as frank and honest as you can. Write that letter and then rip it up, or better yet, burn it, and watch the smoke rise to the heavens up to your loved one. And as the smoke is rising, or as you're watching those bits of paper fall into the garbage bin, try, and I know it's hard, but try to make peace with those unresolved feelings. Because the truth is, you can't let those unresolved feelings go unchecked. You have to learn to process them and live with them. And that's the bottom line with grief. There's no getting over the loss of a loved one. You just have to try to find ways to incorporate the loss into your life as you move forward. I would like to take this moment to teach you a deep breathing technique because I realize we're immersed tonight in a sad topic and that I've talked about a lot of hard things. Deep breathing is something that I share often about, and though many people doubt its benefits, this is a very easy, very doable, very beneficial way of improving how you feel, especially in emotionally difficult moments. The biological reality is that when we are upset, we take shallow breaths, which means our bodies are not getting enough oxygen when we need it most. Deep breathing allows the body to function more effectively because those deep breaths oxygenate your body more fully. This not only increases energy, but also has a calming effect. Deep breathing is simple. You take a deep breath in through your nose for whatever count that you can, hold that breath for a few beats, then slowly release that breath through your mouth. I use the 4-7-8 breathing technique. Well, for one reason, because my in breath is always short. But the science behind it is that when you exhale and when your exhale is longer than your inhale, you help switch off the stress arm of your nervous system and activate the relaxation arm. Some people can't make it fully for any of these counts. You set the pace and the count that is comfortable for you. Something else that you can do, that you can add to this, is saying silently in your mind the word peace or calm as you take in that in breath, while repeating the word sadness or anger on the out breath, as you imagine yourself breathing in that peace and breathing out that sadness. Let's practice some mindful breathing right now. I invite you to close your eyes. And we're going to start by taking a deep breath in through your nose. Hold that breath. Then slowly release that breath through your mouth. Let's do that together a few times. And we're going to add the counting component. I will add it out loud for you. Breathe in through the nose, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, breathe in through the nose, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One more deep breath in through the nose, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm sure just those few seconds of mindful breathing have filled your body with a sense of peace and calm. Practicing deep mindful breathing regularly is important, not only because practice makes better, but also because your body will get accustomed to deep breathing as a soothing practice. So that when you're in a moment of intense stress or emotion, the body will draw on the muscle memory of how deep breathing feels, and it acts as a signal to initiate that soothing, calming sensation. Deep breathing is certainly a strategy you can depend on if you're in a highly emotional state, maybe feeling anger or sadness, and is one which I recommend for you to add to your list of what can help you in those difficult moments. Sometimes the pain of losing someone we love is so intense, we can't find a way to manage ourselves or what we are feeling. This is when I want to recommend seeking grief counseling or maybe even joining a bereavement group. These are safe spaces where you can process your grief and learn strategies for coping. I want to spend a couple of minutes here talking about what does not help. And the biggest thing that doesn't help your grieving process is being hard on yourself and trying to deny your feelings or putting a timer or a time frame on your feelings, saying things like, I should be done grieving by now, or I shouldn't still be crying so much at this stage. Your feelings are your feelings, and your grief process is your grief process. This is a time when you need to be compassionate and kind towards yourself, even if that time frame is long. So let me introduce you to the concept of self-compassion. Dr. Kristin Neff was the first person to bring this concept of self-compassion to life in a way that allowed it to be researched and formalized. Dr. Neff outlined 3 elements of self-compassion: self-kindness versus self-judgment, common humanity versus isolation, and mindfulness versus over-identification. When we're grieving, we have a tendency to judge ourselves because there really is no timeline or time frame for grief. And many people feel it for a very, very long time. And that can make us and others feel uncomfortable. So we're also worrying about others judging us. And just think about how much worse our grief is when we have all of that piled on top of missing the person who has passed and trying to figure out how to live without them. The idea of self-kindness as an alternative to that self-judgment just feels like such a soothing balm to the soul. Think about it. We don't judge others when they are suffering. We offer comfort and words of support so that they won't feel bad. We do our best to prop them up so they don't falter. As outsiders looking in, we understand that they are doing the best that they can, and we don't hold their suffering or failures or faults against them. That's because in that moment, We recognize them as fellow human beings and we embrace that shared humanity. Self compassion is just that. And in the context of grief and grieving, it is the understanding that when we are grieving, we need to be kind and gentle with ourselves. We need to give ourselves some grace. We need to accept our human nature, our human response to the loss of our loved one. Mindfully accept what we are feeling instead of being self critical and judgmental. Let's try this quick exercise. Close your eyes and with a kind and compassionate mind, start by acknowledging what you are thinking and feeling. Before you label those reactions as good or bad, just observe those thoughts or feelings. Try accepting instead of fighting against whatever is running through your mind. Adopt a gentle response to yourself. Imagine what you might feel towards a loved one going through the same thing. What would you say to that person? How would you show that person support? What might you tell that person to help them feel understood? Use that compassionate mind, that kindness, to acknowledge that grief is painful and grieving is hard. And on days when you feel low and just can't be positive or find meaning or don't achieve whatever goal you set for yourself, rather than beat yourself up, remind yourself that tomorrow is a new day, an opportunity to reset and try again. So try and not judge yourself for not doing better or for grieving for too long. Maybe because people are telling you it's time to get over it or that you should be feeling better by now. Your loss is not a cold or a flu. So why would you or anyone else think that you're supposed to just get over it? That's why it's called a grieving process. And as I explained before, science tells us that grief is real and how it affects our mind and body are very, very real. So truly, the only way to get through it is to go through it in your own way. The last area I want to cover today is related to how you can help someone else who is grieving. The first thing I want to share is a reminder that you are not anyone's grief counselor, unless, of course, you are specially trained and working in this area. You cannot make anyone feel better. All you can do is be there for that person, create a safe space for them to share about their loss and what they're feeling. Creating a safe space means not judging them or pushing them to accept their loss or to get over it. This means that you need to be careful with the language that you use in that regard. Use language that validates their feelings and their pain. Also, be ready and willing to seek out resources that they might need. So, maybe the number for a grief counselor or a bereavement group, or an offer to take them to a counseling appointment or to religious service. You could even offer to exercise with them. To that end, I wanted to share some available resources with you. There is a website called grief.com, and their resources are what I call seasonal, which means that they provide resources related to whatever is coming up. So, for example, since Mother's Day is coming up, they have something on navigating grief around this time of year. They also have support and resources for coping with grief and trauma in natural disasters. So, it's very relevant to the current moment. Another resource is Psychology Today, which will allow you to search for grief counseling in your area. The American Psychological Association also has tools for grief and grieving. And this link that I provided here will take you directly to those tools. The CDC also has lots of information available on grief, including how to find services and treatment. Truthfully, all you need to do is a quick internet search on grief or grief resources, and you will find a wealth of handouts and information to help. But to get you started, I'm going to post these links in the chat right now so that you have them. Give me 1 second and I'll do that. There we go. So hopefully I've given you some ideas today for how to honor your lost loved ones and cope with your grief. Let me close my presentation by saying this. Grief is painful, so very painful, but it won't feel like this forever. Your relationship with grief will eventually shift, maybe slowly over time, with ups and downs in between, but it does and will get easier. I would like to end this evening by sharing the following quote that is attributed to a famous actor who said, "Grief is not just an emotion, it's an unraveling, a space where something once lived but is now gone. It carves through you, leaving a hollow ache where love once resided. In the beginning, it feels unbearable, like a wound that will never close. But over time, the raw edges begin to mend. The pain softens, but the imprint remains, a quiet reminder of what once was. The truth is, you never truly move on. You move with it. The love you had does not disappear, it transforms. It lingers in the echoes of laughter, in the warmth of old memories, in the silent moments where you still reach for what is no longer there. And that's okay. Grief is not a burden to be hidden. It is not a weakness to be ashamed of. It is the deepest proof that love existed, that something beautiful once touched your life. So let yourself feel it. Let yourself mourn. Let yourself remember. There is no timeline, no right way to grieve. Some days will be heavy and some will feel lighter. Some moments will bring unexpected waves of sadness, while others will fill you with gratitude for the love you were lucky enough to experience. Honor your grief, for it is sacred. It is a testament to the depth of your heart. And in time, through the pain, you will find healing. Not because you've forgotten, but because you've learned how to carry both love and loss together. I want to thank you all for listening, and I invite you to share in the chat if you have not already done so, your name if you would like to receive the PowerPoint presentation, but also your story of grief or about a loved one you have lost and who you miss. And if there's anything that you have done that has helped you in your grieving process, please share that too. I will keep this Zoom room open until 10 p.m.